Amid soaring market rallies and global economic uncertainty, the high-stakes standoff between President Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, has taken a dramatic turn. Once vocal in his criticism of Powell's monetary policies, Trump now appears to be softening his tone as he warnings emerge about potential financial turmoil from escalating tariffs or leadership changes in the Fed. With Powell's term nearing its end and legal ambiguities surrounding presidential authority to remove him, this power struggle carries profound implications for U.S. economic stability and the global markets. I'm Mercy. Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The Washington Post has reported that President Donald Trump's recent reversal of attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell highlights a vital moment for U.S. economic policy. After sparking market turmoil by calling Powell a major loser, Trump dialed back the rhetoric following advice from top aides, who warned of destabilizing financial markets amid trade disputes. The American newspaper added that tensions rose as Powell criticized Trump's tariffs, warning of inflation risks. Legal experts note firing Powell would challenge statutes requiring cause. While Trump claims no intent to remove him, analysts fear undermining the Fed's independence could harm global confidence, as seen in Monday's rare market declines. Powell remains committed to his term, backed by bipartisan support amid ongoing debates over political influence and economic stability. According to the New York Times, President Donald Trump's claim of no intention to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell does not end their contentious dynamic. His public attacks and calls for rate cuts challenges the Fed's independence, a pillar of U.S. economic stability. With inflation at 2.8% and tariffs risking stagflation, the Fed faces mounting pressure. Legal interpretation of the for-cause removal standard further threatens its autonomy, while Trump's executive orders on regulation strain its role. The press added that analysts warn sustained political interference could erode decades of credibility, even without Powell's removal. As global markets grow uneasy, the clash highlights an existential threat to the Fed's ability to stabilize the economy, questioning whether short-term political pressure will override long-term fiscal responsibilities. From heated clashes to a surprising détente, the Trump-Powell conflict takes a new turn. What does this mean for the U.S. economy and global markets? Stay tuned for insights.
The ongoing tension between U.S. President Donald Trump and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has captivated global attention, with significant implications for the economy. While Trump once openly criticized Powell's monetary policies, recent reports indicate he has backed off his attacks. This shift comes amid warnings that firing Powell could trigger financial turmoil, including empty shelves and market instability.
I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates. This is a perfect time to lower interest rates. If he doesn't, is it the end? No.
Legal experts confirm that while Trump can criticize, removing Powell before his term ends would require extraordinary measures, unlikely without just cause. Wall Street reacted positively to this detent. Markets rallied nearly 3% worldwide after Trump clarified he had no intention of dismissing Powell. Economically, tariffs imposed under Trump have also complicated relations with the Fed. Critics argue these policies strain inflation control efforts led by Powell. Analysts warn such conflicts risk undermining investor confidence, especially during economic recoveries post-pandemic. The IMF projected that any 10% increase in U.S. tariffs accompanied by retaliatory measures could reduce U.S. GDP by 1%, further complicating Powell's task of balancing growth and price stability. For developing states, which are nations vulnerable to global economic shifts due to its reliance on imports and foreign investment, stability in U.S. monetary policy matters greatly. A divided U.S. leadership could exacerbate volatility, impacting emerging economies.
Chair Jerome Powell, joined from Washington by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy of Washington, and Mr. Peter Roth, a contributing editor at Newsweek. Thank you both for joining us here on Think Tank. Let's start off with Mr. Russell. How does Trump's recent acquiescence with Powell reflect broader geopolitical concerns about U.S. economic stability amid the escalating trade tariffs tensions?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is a common sense approach being put out there by President Trump. Look, Trump realized that he was not going to get support from his own party on the Hill. What he was threatening to do just maybe 96 hours ago by threatening to get rid of Jerome Powell, he knows now is not allowed by law. And he started to see the market reaction. Look, this is just a continuing series of missteps by the Trump administration to try and handle economic pressures, but if anything, they've been mishandled very badly. You're talking about an $11 trillion market loss in U.S. economic markets, probably double that in global markets. And then we're also seeing the fact that inflation is going up, it's not going down, and it's not because of Jerome Powell or the interest rates, it's because of this wildly not well thought out tariff policy that he's just shotgunning across global markets. So there's a lot of things happening, and Donald Trump now realizes he needs Jerome Powell. He needs a steady hand at the helm of the central bank and being able to have somebody whose sole job is to help control inflation. He doesn't need him as an enemy. He needs Jerome Powell as an ally.
Okay, Mr. Roth, what about you? Do you agree with Mr. Russell that there have been a series of missteps when it comes to economic policy? Could Trump's softening also, when it comes to Powell, signal a strategic recalibration, avoiding market turmoil, or is it merely just some sort of temporary truce, and then we're going to see what happens later on?
Well, the first mistake that Trump has made was not focusing immediately on the extension of the tax cuts that are set to expire at the end of the year, for a lot of reasons, some of which I understand, some of which I don't, some of which are political, and almost none of which are economic. President should have put all of his efforts into keeping the tax rates where they are, stopping the scheduled increase at the end of the year, so that the markets would have certainty, so that business would have certainty and could plan, and that they would know that the largest tax increase in American history wasn't a possibility for next year, affecting their behavior this year. Powell's decision to not again cut interest rates plays into that as well, because it prevents or at least reduces the chance that people are going to borrow for purposes of investing in expansion and in things that produced economic growth. I do want to correct one thing here. There's a narrative that's developed that that there's a law that says the president can't fire the Fed chairman, and there is no such animal. There is no law that says that. There is a Supreme Court decision dating back to the early part of the last century that limits the president's authority to fire presidential appointees who are confirmed by the Senate to positions that are supposed to be independent. But there's a equally strong body of law that argues that that is actually an incorrect limitation on the president's authority over the executive branch. And the Trump administration is believed very much to want to challenge the findings of that Supreme Court decision, thinking that the current court would see much more favorably the ability of a president to fire a Fed chairman or a member of the Federal Trade Commission or a Commodities Futures Trading Commission member for reasons other than cause. That these are in fact political appointees, and that the idea that all of these supposedly independent agencies exist threatens the democratic process. And in fact, calling the president's criticism of the Fed a constitutional crisis, or some of the other, an abuse of his authority or a threat to the independence of the Federal Reserve is just nonsense. I mean, the Fed is going to do what the Fed is going to do, and if the Fed chairman,
does this affect investor confidence in the U.S. economy?
Oh, it absolutely affects investor confidence. But anything that threatens a change in the status quo affects investor confidence. Investor confidence exists because people have figured out how the market's behaving and how any change in that reduces investor confidence. Any change. Okay. Tax rates go up, tax rates go down.
Yes.
The Fed, a new chairman is appointed, chairman is fired. It all affects investor confidence. And to pretend otherwise is to take sides in a public policy debate without admitting that's what you're doing.
Well, Mr. Roth, so if we could also get your take on this. Now, you heard Mr. Roth talking about the idea of, the legal ambiguity of the forced removal clause. What's your take on this, and how might Trump's challenges to the Fed's independence reshape, global perceptions of the U.S.
Look, I completely respect Mr. Roth and his take, and in a certain aspect, he is correct. When we talk about the law, okay, now let me just be clear. I'm not a lawyer. I may play one on TV as a policy guy, but I am not a lawyer. However, with legal counsel that I have spoken with on this issue, they have said that this has been tried before in the courts. The Supreme Court ruling does give it almost a stare decisis kind of aspect to this. But again, it has not been tried in many decades. There's never been a seated president that wants to take the risk of disrupting the economic policies of the United States or economic stability of the U.S. markets or even the global markets, because this would have a ripple effect. So in certain aspect, I agree with Mr. Roth. I see what he's saying, but we also have to understand that legal aspect, that there is a stare decisis kind of methodology to that. That being said, the reality is now that Donald Trump is caught between a rock and a hard spot right now, especially when it comes to his economic policies. The economic policies that he has put together, which including controlling inflation, controlling interest rates, which Jerome Powell has a very keen sense on. The people that are going to be affected by the Donald Trump economic policies are going to affect those that put him into office. Those are the middle class people, the class voters, the middle class economic branch. And what's going to happen from there is they're the ones that are going to take it in the wallet. They're the ones that are going to see the biggest effects. They're not going to be able to borrow money effectively. They're not going to be able to expand their small businesses. In fact, some of these economic policies could contract or close small businesses. And the global ripple effect, particularly when it comes to this trade and tariff war with China, it could create a mutually assured economic destruction scenario where Trump's policies could affect large-scale global economic disaster for years to come. So Donald Trump is going to have to really, really lean on some of the more sensible economic advisors that he has, including Jerome Powell, including
So you think
Secretary
that the
of Treasury
step back
Bennett.
that he took was basically to somehow attempt to preserve, investor confidence in the U.S.?
Look, if we're looking at Donald Trump to try and have some sort or try and gain the confidence of investors in the U.S. and global markets, he has been wildly unsuccessful in doing so. We've seen that in the losses. We've seen that every time he speaks. The roller coaster fluctuations of ups and downs that we see in the markets right now don't give Wall Street or investors or even those who own small businesses any sort of confidence that they can put investments into this economy and see it grow or even be it secure. That being the case, I do want to state that the fact that Donald Trump starting to draw back on his attacks on Jerome Powell, smart move. We're seeing that somewhat result in a little bit of stability in Wall Street and the other U.S. markets. The other thing that we're going to see is we're starting to see Donald Trump kind of back off some of this trade war rhetoric that he's putting out there with China, and that's going to be a big deal. He's going to have to back down because that's the only way we're going to see global economic stability. Is you can't have the two biggest economies on the planet going head to head in a trade and tariff war and expect there to be global stability in global markets.
Okay, Mr. Ruff, what about you? How does Powell's warnings about, inflation risks from Trump's tariffs complicate the administration's economic agenda? We're also talking about a softening of policy generally when it comes to Trump, when it concerns, the tariffs and the Fed chair as well.
I think Powell's comments on tariffs are frankly, a minor annoyance. Powell is a dead man walking in one sense. His term is up in about a year. He's not going to be reappointed. There are other things that can happen. There is no prohibition, for example, on Mr. Trump removing him as chairman of the Fed and appointing one of the other Fed members to be the chairman of the remainder of our likewise, we've had Fed chairmen fired before. Jimmy Carter fired the Fed chairman by promoting him into the position of Treasury Secretary. And we got Paul Volcker as his replacement, and Volcker did a I'm not for them, but the problem the president has identified is very real. Mm-hmm. There are countries around this world who have erected unfair tariffs and other barriers to U.S. industry selling their goods and services.
But do you agree that the trade war or the tariff war,
was just done to the high-tech industry?
But would you agree with Mr. Russell when it comes to the tariff war is a mutually assured destruction for both China and the U.S.?
No, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that America is probably better able to withstand Chinese tariffs than it is able to withstand our tariffs, even though they've been taking aggressive steps over the last 5 years to tariff-proof themselves. China China has an rapidly aging population, demographic crisis. They need the jobs that American industry provides over there. Something has to happen to tariffs down to get U.S. access to goods and services. And note that the Trump administration has been very clear that of the 170 countries that were on Trump's tariff list, 150 have reached out to begin conversations about tariff adjustments. I think that he can get to 165, frankly, of the 170. That the tariff rates will change. And I think that's what the intention of Trump's policy is. You know, we've had negotiations, tried conversations, we've talked about free trade. America pursues free trade, and you all protect your industry, whether it's French wine or Irish potatoes or Canadian chicken or Norwegian kippers. Protect your industry, and we're supposed to just laugh it on the chin because, you know, we're America, big, and we're rich, and we're good guys. Well, you know, our farmers and our businessmen and our executives and our tech guys want to sell our stuff in your country.
Yeah, Mr. Russell, you don't seem too happy with what's been said. Do you have anything that you would like to say or on what was saying?
Look, I respect Mr. Ross, and I respect the work he does at Newsweek. But we have to look at this from a realistic perspective. To say that the U.S. is better off from a Chinese-U.S. trade war is, I just don't see it, and neither do a majority of the economists.
I didn't say that. I said that the United States was better positioned to survive a trade war than China. I didn't say it was a good thing.
Okay.
Let me rephrase that. I stand corrected. We can't even better survive it. We have to look at this from a practical standpoint. The U.S. hasn't been a major manufacturing power in decades. As a result, we've created this spoiled, entitled economy and this spoiled, entitled consumer that loves buying cheap, foreign-made products at a cheap price in just-in-time logistics. I can get on Amazon right now, buy a TCL or a Hisense flat-screen TV, 52-inch or whatever, for $250 and have it delivered in 48 hours. The American economy is dependent on that, just as much as the Chinese economy is dependent on us buying those products. So until we start manufacturing, and this concept that Donald Trump has been putting out there, we've got 92,000 factories that lay abandoned. First of all, there's not 82,000 factories that lie abandoned in the U.S. We didn't have that 50 years ago. What we do have, though, is an industrial base that doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the capacity to overnight just fill that void that China puts into our economy. It would take us at least, according to economists that I talk to, at least minimum 5 years to even come close.
Since you brought this up, sir, if I could ask like the both of you this question and see your take on it. Like you said that, you know, China is a powerhouse when it comes to, you know, industry and production and so forth. And it has large market share. We've seen a depletion when it comes to the US market share. Do you think that tariffs are the solution when it comes to, you know, I suppose promoting American products across the world, or easing tariffs and making it more accessible and trying to get deals with other countries, competing with China, opening up markets basically? Let's start off with Mr. Roth and then Mr. Russell.
The right way to do this, and what I hope is going on, is that by threatening to impose tariffs on foreign goods coming into the United States, President Trump will get other countries to agree to lower their barriers to American goods coming into their countries, so they don't have to raise the tariffs. That's what I'm hoping happens, that this is a stratagem to produce freer, fairer trade.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Russell? What do you think?
Well, you know, what Mr. Ross is talking about, and this is something that nobody is talking about right now, is the fact that the reason why we have a trade representative is to consistently deal with these tariff issues and these trade issues, whether it's trade deficits, whether it's tariff, however, that's why we have a trade representative. To that point, we have not seen in at least 15 years an effective trade representative that can represent the interests of the economy and our manufacturing and our industries here in the United States, as well as addressing the trade deficit. Where I will give the Trump administration a slight bit of credit is they are bringing this to light. And what I'm hopeful for is that we will see a trade representative that is understanding and capable enough to realize that we can't just go shotgun across the globe and expect everybody to come back to us. Because what that threatens to do is, let's say, for example, one of our biggest trading partners in Canada. Canada has nothing left to gain except for the fact that they can say, all right, you know what, we're done trading with you. We're going to make our big trading partner China or India or Brazil, some other large-scale market with manufacturing capabilities, India, that they will say, you know what, the heck with you, we're going to take our money elsewhere because you're making it difficult for us to trade with that. That is where the trade representative and economic policy has to be focused on. It is not just an overnight situation. This is something time that takes sensibility, and you have to be practical about it, or else we're going to get into the situation that Donald Trump found himself getting into, and that is global market erosion in the confidence of the U.S.
Okay, we're out of time for this episode, but thank you both for joining us. That was Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Washington, and Mr. Peter Roth, Contributing Editor at Newsweek. Thank you both for your insights, and thank you for joining us. Amid the shifting rhetoric and high-stakes economic tensions, the Trump-Powell standoff underscores a fragile balance between political ambition and institutional resilience. As global markets react, the world watches whether U.S. economic stability will prevail. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank, which always unveils the complexities of our ever-changing world. Thank you for watching. I'm Rehan Morsi, and stay tuned for more here on Qnews.